Hello, I'm Hilary Crow, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's inaugural Tech Forward program. At the Chamber Foundation, our mission is to educate the public on how business does well, does good, and prepares for the future. And it's that last bit, preparing for the future, that's my favorite, because that's where we get to bring experts and leaders across industries to share expertise and insights and recommendations on how we can shape and create a better future. So, how can you future proof your business? Well, we've created this interactive platform to explore just that. Whether you're a small business, a big business, you're in education, retail, manufacturing, or another industry, we want to help demystify and unpack some of the biggest, most complex trends and technologies shaping your work today and in the future. So, with technology jumping off of our screens and into our everyday lives, a lot of us are left wondering, how does this new tech advancement impact my business or my stakeholders or me as a consumer? And how do I ensure that I'm part of the wave and not knocked down by it? Thinking back to some earlier technologies, it took us about 100 years to go from the telephone to the personal computer. But we know that innovation is moving much quicker now. So we hope this series will help serve as what we like to call a mental day at the gym, where you can learn to build and flex some new muscles. So the topic of today, the metaverse. We're delighted to be joined by two experts already working in this new virtual space. Joining us is Cathy Hackl, Chief Metaverse Officer and CEO of the Futures Intelligence Group, and David Dintenfass, Chief Marketing Officer and Head of Emerging Customers at Fidelity Investments. As we dive in, please enter your questions in the chat. We're going to answer those at the end of the program. We have a lot to cover, and we thank you for joining us on this exciting journey. So let's get started. Hi, Cathy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Hilary. Excited to be here for this first Tech Forward session.
Well, thank you. We are excited to jump into the metaverse, but before we do, I thought it might be helpful to talk first to our audience about the overall tech landscape and some of the megatrends that we need to watch. First, maybe we should start with, what is a megatrend?
So megatrends are these important moments, right, of change. So for example, technology, climate, politics, economics, they're bigger trends that impact everyone in a bigger pattern, right, that have rippling effects across all parts of society. Obviously technology is the mega trend that I mostly follow because it's where I've spent most of my time. But there are patterns that impact at a larger scale society as a whole, and they can be, they could be, like I said, technology, it could be climate, it could be economics, but on a bigger kind of view, and have a larger impact across society.
Great, thank you. And so when we think about megatrends in technology, what would you say are the top 5 or so technologies, emerging technologies right now?
Yeah, I would say that, if you look at everything that's happening right now and how things are accelerating, right? You've got many different things, like artificial intelligence obviously has been of big interest to the United States and to a lot of different companies and a lot of different countries around the world. So that's definitely one place where a lot of people are, focusing their attention. You've got augmented reality, virtual reality. You've got the blockchain as well, very important. You've got obviously the conversation around metaverse and Web3, which is not a technology per se, but it is kind of a sea change in how we experience the internet. But I would say there's just a lot of different things changing and evolving. I mean, quantum computing as well as one of the big things. It's a really interesting moment because technology is accelerating at a pace that we really haven't seen this type of acceleration before, and it's definitely not slowing down. But I would definitely say also climate science. There's many different things that are happening right now from a technological standpoint that I think are going to have impacts across all parts of society.
Thank you. So, jumping into the metaverse, which is why we're really here today, how would you explain what the metaverse is to somebody who really doesn't know anything about it?
So, in order for me to kind of talk about the metaverse, I kind of have to talk about where we've been. So, in a Web 1.0, we connected information that gave us the internet that obviously changed a lot of things for us as society, and also for businesses, right? And Web 1.0 evolved into what's called the Web 2.0, which connected people. And that also gave us social media, which obviously has impacted a lot of us and has changed a lot of the ways we communicate, but also gave us the sharing economy and in digital commerce and e-commerce. So it has been an evolution on connecting people. We're at this moment right now where we're connecting, or we're starting to evolve beyond connecting people to connecting people, places, and things, or people, spaces, and assets. And these people, spaces, and assets in what's called the Web 3, can be in virtual spaces, but also can be in the physical world, right? So when we head into this new, this evolution from Web 2 to Web 3, there's something that starts to be created and enabled, which is the metaverse, which is that conversation around the future of the internet. What is the successor state to today's mobile internet? Most people would agree that it is the metaverse, whether that's a term we'll use in 10 years, I'm not sure, right? But the successor state to today's mobile internet is referred to as the metaverse. It is enabled by many, many different technologies. So the technologies you just asked me about. So for example, the metaverse is not one technology and it is not one single company. The metaverse is enabled by many different technologies like VR, AR, AI, 5G, voice, cloud computing, edge computing. I mean, blockchain, there's many different technologies that enable this future successor state of today's mobile internet. But what does this successor state look like? It is pretty much, just think of like the internet breaking free from our phones and being all around us, right? Kind of immersing us. And it is a further convergence of our lives that we're living on our phones and our computers, like our virtual lives, with our physical lives. It is, like I said, it's not one technology and it is not one company. It is enabled by many technologies. It is being built by many different companies, right? And it is kind of where we're heading. It is the future of the internet. So yeah, it's kind of an evolution of where we've been in Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and heading further into that, destination metaverse. You also have this interesting moment right now around gaming, right? Gaming is the on-ramp to the metaverse. Gaming is the parent to the metaverse. And this kind of moments, these things that are happening around gaming that are really interesting. So, Hilary, an example I always give to people is that for most of the people watching this right now, their first concert was probably in a stadium. They went to see their favorite artist, right? But for my son, it was Little Nas X and Roblox, right? And he says, I was there, I saw Nas, I experienced this, right? To him, it's a real memory, right? So it's this convergence and changing societally, and generationally wise, of thinking of our virtual lives as separate from our physical lives. So it's thinking that idea that just because it happens in the virtual space does not make it less real for these younger generations. A case, an example for anyone here is that during the pandemic, many of you probably had a Zoom Christmas or a Zoom Hanukkah, and just because it happened on Zoom didn't make it less real. You weren't with the people you loved. You couldn't really hug them, right? But you still have that memory. You probably remember that moment or that Zoom Thanksgiving, right? So once again, it's understanding that there is a bit of a change there in what we perceive to be real, right? It's almost like you have to think about the physical world which we're in right now, but also the virtual experiences that we have and that we live through right now, on mostly on Web 2 interfaces like LinkedIn or Roblox or what have you. So
That context really helps and also explains why this was sort of sped up over the course of the pandemic, right? When we were in such a time where we were apart for good reason, but also had that want to figure out ways to still be together in a meaningful way. So thank you for that context. um, I also, I always thought as a kid growing up watching Cinderella that it would be pretty cool to have a godmother, and you've been dubbed the godmother of the metaverse. What does that mean? What does that mean with your role with the metaverse?
So this is actually a title, let's say, that was given to me by my friend Andrew Schwartz, who works with Nike's Metaverse team. He, like I always tell people, I did not self-appoint myself that. Someone gave me that name, and then the community started running with it. It was actually on Twitter, August of last year. Alexis Ohanian, which many of you guys probably know, asked about which women and minorities he should be following that do in metaverse and NFTs. And my friend Andrew Schwartz said, he mentioned a few people and he said, oh, and don't forget Cathy Hackl, she's the godmother of the metaverse. So he gave me that name. But the reason he gave me that name is because I have been in metaverse related industries for almost 8 years. Like, this is not something that I read an article and then became an expert. No, like, I've been doing this for the last decade, working very deeply inside these companies. For example, I worked at HTC Vive, which does VR devices. I was their VR evangelist during the partnership with Steven Spielberg's adaptation of Ready Player One. I went off, I went later to work at Magic Leap, which, if if anyone knows what they are, but they're super futuristic, amazing company. They're still around. But our chief futurist there was Neil Stevenson, the person that coined the term metaverse. And when you worked at Magic Leap, one of the North Stars for the company was the metaverse. And I believe it still is. And then went over to work at Amazon Web Services on many things, including large-scale gaming simulations. And then eventually, went off on my own. So, I've been at this for a long time. I've been talking to executives and to companies about the metaverse and what it means for years. The thing that changed is that now they want to pay attention. Now they're like, wait a second, what is this metaverse? What is this future of the internet we're heading into? And what do I need to start doing to lead into this future, right? So yeah, that's kind of how it all came about. I also do a lot of things around community, the Web3 community as well. So I think it's a combination of both a badge of honor because I was given that name by someone in the community, and then the community running with it and kind of just crowning me with that title. So I try to make sure that everything I do helps push us to a better future, and that we tend, another thing is like for us to be able to have some of the very uncomfortable conversations now before we get to that future, so that we can at least prepare ourselves better than we did in Web 1 and Web 2.
Awesome. Well, I love that. So, jumping in a little bit more on the business side of things, could you give us some examples of how businesses are already operating in the metaverse and how consumers might expect to see that show up on the business side of things?
Yeah, so I've worked with a lot of different companies and brands. For example, Ralph Lauren, Procter and Gamble, Clinique, on creating and helping them with metaverse strategies and Web3 strategies. But what you're seeing is that the companies that are approaching this new era authentically, right, and with a spirit of innovation and a spirit of experimenting, are the ones that are really pushing things forward. So I think it's interesting to take a step back and think about Web 1, Web 2, and what sectors were leading innovation, right? So, I think like, probably adult entertainment led in those two, in those two moments. But what you have right now is this moment where fashion and art are leading innovation, are pushing the limits of these technologies. And I think that says a lot about this moment in time that we're in, that it is fashion and art that are pushing the limits of the technology and where we're heading. So yeah, I think for the companies and the businesses that are approaching this in a smart way, they're understanding that yes, their marketing teams want to do something, right? Want to put their stake in the ground, want to be the first to do X in the metaverse, right? Because that's what the marketing teams want. They want that PR. But maybe after they've done that, they take a step back and really think about, what does the future of the internet mean for my company and my brand, and start to create holistic strategies that have clear pilots. One of the biggest things here, Hilary, is like, I always get asked, what's the ROI? What's the ROI? The reality is that this is so nascent and it is so new that you can have some projections, yeah, but it's really hard to have a clear ROI because it's so new. And maybe the metrics, some of the metrics that we've used in Web 1 and Web 2 might not necessarily apply or be the same in the future we're heading into. So I'll give you an example. So normally, you would measure your success on on social media by shares and likes and all those sorts of things. Well, when we're heading into this space that is a lot more about gaming, you're talking about experiences, right? And people, for example, with one of the experiences I worked on Roblox, the people that were going into this experience, this branded experience, were spending 10 to 12 minutes of their time in this branded experience, right? That is 10 to 12 minutes of dwell time with that company and that brand. That's something you do not get with a talk. You do not get it with a tweet. You don't get it with, a post. That's very fleeting. So what you're starting to see is this moment for businesses to create experiences to engage with not followers, but fans, right? In very different ways. So you almost have to look at this place that we're heading into as the future of fandom, right? Who loves my brand or who loves my company, whether I'm a small business or whether I'm a giant brand? Who loves what I do, right? And how can I engage with them in a different way? How can I, maybe using blockchain technology, give loyalty points or award the people that are loyal to my brand? So I think it's changing the way that companies and brands engage with the people that love their products and their services. And yeah, it's early, right? It's very nascent. It's still early, but I see this amazing path forward where we're going to change that. And on the creator side, because now that was brands, right? But on the creator side, I also see this evolution where creators, right, are sharing in the value of their creations. And that's something Shelley Palmer said. It's a different moment, right? Where instead of just posting an image on Instagram and getting a like, which doesn't generate much for them really, they're actually selling things on the blockchain and making money in perpetuity, depending on what they're selling. So I think there is this moment right now that we're in where you start to think about, the ad revenue models of the Web 2 era. How do they work in Web 3? Do we need to evolve those models, right, that created the Web 2 giants? It's potentially going to change in Web 3. The models are going to be different. So that's something for people to start to think about. It's not necessarily that it's changing immediately, but it's slowly changing towards more engagement, more experience, potentially different metrics, and yeah, just a different way of engaging with the people that love your services and products.
That seems really critical for businesses, of all sizes. As a small business who might be listening to this right now,
Yep.
is this something that they can get into? How do you jump in? Sort of what are the first steps? Are there, positions you need to fill, people who have specific skill sets? Really, where do you get started?
Yeah. I think every company and brand is going to approach this differently. It's crawl, walk, run, right? Some of the companies I work with are running, right? They're all in on this. They're creating metaverse business units. Like it's different. They're there. For some of the smaller, businesses, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go and hire a game developer right now, but it might mean that you should educate yourself. These are silly things, but as simple as maybe getting on the Roblox and playing with your kids or playing Fortnite with your kids and understanding what is happening there, right? Just like these small businesses are using Instagram and Twitter and Facebook to draw people through the door because they use social media, they need to start to think about what is happening in Roblox and Fortnite and these gaming spaces where people are socializing now. That's the new campfire. That is the new place where they socialize. So starting to understand what is happening in these spaces. So as simple as getting on Roblox or Fortnite and playing with your kids and trying to understand what does this mean? How does commerce happen? How do people find out about things? What are the customer journeys? Right? Something as simple as that, all the way to, to actually doing an NFT for your loyalty community or, and that's not financial advice. Or eventually hiring game developers or looking internally at your teams and see who might have some of these skills that we're going to need as we craft this future we're heading into. So I think it's crawl, walk, run. There is no one size fits all. Everyone's going to approach this from a different way. But education, it starts with education from everyone from the mom and pop shop to the big Fortune 500s. It's education where you need to start.
Thank you. I could definitely ask you more questions, but it's time to transition to our next segment. We'll bring you back after the conversation with Fidelity Investments for some questions from the audience. I see they've been pouring in over the last several minutes. So thank you, and we will move on next to our next segment.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, a very warm thank you to Cathy and Hilary for hosting, I think, what was truly a very eye-opening first part of today's session. In this next session, I'll be your host, Jez Jowett, and I will be covering in conversation with David how Fidelity Investments is using the metaverse in their business. So I have huge pleasure in inviting David to introduce himself, and then we will spend the next 15 minutes exploring what Fidelity Investments has done within the metaverse. David.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jez. And again, thanks so much to Hilary and the Chamber for having me here. I'm the CMO and the head of emerging customers at Fidelity Investments, and look forward to answering some questions.
David, it's very, very nice to have you on the call with us today. The first question is actually specifically about something which was in the press recently. So before we dive in, I see that you are leading the emerging customers segment. And what does that actually mean for Fidelity? What does that mean for you at Fidelity?
Yeah. So, why is a investing company thinking about, young people? I mean, we were known as a retirement company, and I'd say traditionally, we want to be open to everyone. A lot of our focus has been for people who are thinking about retirement. And frankly, that starts often in the 30s for someone and accelerates into their 40s and 50s. But I think we've realized that we can do more to reach people who are younger. And so there's 80 million Americans between 18 and 35. And while we have 10 million of them that currently work with Fidelity, we think there's a lot of potential to do more with people earlier in their financial lives, prepare them, whether it's spending, saving, or investing. And just a few examples of what that means. I mean, we've been trying to really break down the barriers people have, the perceptions of becoming an investor. And, Cathy talked about the pandemic. I mean, this has been a major pivot point for the investing category. And just before the pandemic started, we tried to break down some barriers by getting rid of all the fees and minimums on our accounts. But accelerating during the pandemic, where people were starting to become investors at a higher rate, and they were going to places like Reddit, which is more of a Web 2.0, to use that framework, a more of a Web 2.0 experience. But we realized that we had to be where those customers were, and this is what eventually led us to the metaverse. But we started to do other things, such as introduce fractional trading, where Google costs, I just checked, $2,300. For a young person, that's a lot just to buy one share. So we introduced the ability to buy just $1, worth of Google or any other share that you'd want to buy, and that has led to a significant growth. So last year, young people 18 to 35, they increased by 3.8 million accounts that came into Fidelity. And as we were talking to them, and this I think goes to the topic of the day, just like Hilary was saying, that Cathy was saying, they were doing things like gaming. They were forcing us to look at other platforms where they were spending time with their friends, and we only saw that accelerate during the pandemic. So we've made this concerted effort to introduce this group that's just exclusively focused on the emerging customers of tomorrow.
David, I think that gives us all a very good insight into your audience in terms of where they were and what they were doing. The second question relates to timing. So why did Fidelity choose that this was the right time to build something within a metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, let me use Cathy's framework, because it's one that we use as well. I think it's spot on. I mean, if Web 1.0 or Web 1 was about connecting information, Fidelity has always tried to stay on the cutting edge of these new wave trends. So the year that we came out, and we were the first investing company to have an internet site, which you can take for granted now, but at that time in 1995, only 9.2% of Americans actively using the web at all. And so, at the time, I'm sure the same questions were coming up, like, what is this thing going to be? But obviously, we all saw where that played out. For Web 2.0, as I was saying, the timing for the metaverse came directly out of what we saw during the pandemic. One example is a platform like TikTok, which I think you could dismiss and say, from an investing company's perspective, this is great for entertainment, and people are spending about 3 hours a day, young people on social media. But why is this really important? Well, it turns out, and this only accelerated the last couple of years, financial questions are one of the most searched topics in all of TikTok. There were 60 billion searches for the hashtag money on TikTok. And what we realized, again, talking to some of these younger customers, is that we had to be where they were. And so from a Web 2.0, we started to be active in those places. And we introduced our own subreddit where we actually have 40,000 members that can answer questions across Reddit. But that led us directly to say, what is going on in Web 3.0? And again, we did see a lot in the gaming space. Almost every young person we talked to was spending more time with their friends in gaming platforms during the pandemic. And if you put two and two together, TikTok originally was not a place people came for financial advice, but evolved into that. I think it is quite likely that these metaverse platforms, these virtual worlds, increasingly will be places that people are asking each other questions. And I think we learned from Reddit that we want to be part of that conversation. We want to make sure people have good information or getting quality facts that they can both get directly from us, but frankly, just get from each other with better education. So that led us into the metaverse.
Thanks, David. The third question is relating to why it was that Investor Quest was the right sort of product or the right route into the metaverse. So could you possibly explain why did Fidelity decide its first excursion into the metaverse was with the Investor Quest?
Yeah, well, so I will explain that, but I think if we have it, there's like a 1-minute video to show a little bit what we did. It gives a better sense. Sometimes a picture speaks 1,000 words.
At Fidelity, we're all about engaging and informing a new generation of investors. And it's taking us to some exciting places. Introducing the Fidelity Stack, only in Decentraland. It's not our first metaverse rodeo, but we are the first brokerage firm to have an immersive, educational metaverse experience. The Fidelity Stack is gamified, interactive, and educational, where you can learn about the metaverse, investing basics, and our new Fidelity Metaverse ETF. So drop in, cut loose, and share your thoughts. We're evolving right along with Web3 to continue driving innovative financial experiences. See you in the metaverse.
So as you see, we decided to go with just Decentraland. We looked at a couple of different platforms, and we've had to learn a lot. I mean, we are exploring. We are testing our way into this. We did a small event that was invitation only in January, which then led to us developing this Invest Quest. And a couple reasons we did it that way. One is we had launched an account that is pretty unique, where a teenager who has a parent that's a Fidelity customer can have an account that they own. We call it the youth account, and they can actually do their own investing. And it comes with education, and it has some protections in it, such as you can't, trade options or margin, sort of more basic trading. And what we found is that these teenagers love that they were actually learning by doing something and not just by reading a book. And so, to the extent possible, these virtual worlds, they create a much more immersive educational experience than just reading an article. So that's exactly what you saw in this Invest Quest experience. You actually go through these different floors, and as you saw, you can interact with different things, such as we have a Metaverse ETF, and you can interact with different stations that tell you the different components there. But we're experimenting with just, putting, like, we have a dance floor. Is that something people are actually going to use, or are they just coming for the information and want to leave? We put some orbs in there so that people would have some wayfinding throughout the experience to try to give it a little bit of a gamification. There's a feedback box. We love to hear from our customers. We've tried to be very customer driven on designing this. So, it was driven on things that we've learned from a Web 2.0, experience and a little bit of Web 3. But I think that there's much more that, we'll probably look back at this and think that this was pretty rudimentary, for where this is likely to end up over time.
Thanks, David. I'm going to put you on the spot now and ask you to imagine you have a crystal ball and we can look into the future. So, David, where do you think this is all going? And what do you expect people will be doing in the metaverse in the future when it does come to financial services?
Yeah, well, I guess, there is no such thing as a crystal ball, but I think some of the questions we're asking right now, we're trying to learn from through this experience. To what extent are people going to come into a metaverse world, at least in financial services? trying to do something that they would do in the real world or doing something that's kind of a fantasy. So for instance, during the pandemic, we saw that people were having video calls with their advisor when they used to want to come to the office. And that taught us a lot about what really creates that bond between two people. Well, in the metaverse, for those of you who have experienced that, it can be a much more intimate conversation than you ever would have imagined. Even if you're using an avatar that's not even using your name and likeness, but it's one that you've created. These can be very immersive experiences. So imagine a world where you just come in because you want to meet with your advisor, but you're not able to actually come into the office. That could be more of an emulating reality. But the fantasy is limitless. Like imagine that you wanted to see your future life in retirement, and maybe with different scenarios where different financial plans would lead you down different paths. Well, you can imagine you could actually create those paths in these virtual worlds, and you could help construct them, and that could have real world applications. I do think, and Cathy touched on this. I mean, certainly people will be and are transacting, so financial services itself is going to become more decentralized over time. I think that's quite certain, to the extent that people transact and exchange property through the blockchain and some of these. We actually are experimenting that right in this experience, so we're looking at wearables that you would actually get on the blockchain, so you'd actually have ownership of it. And we want to see, what happens. Do people actually have demand for that? What kinds of things would spark their imagination? So that's at least a couple of examples of the questions, at least in our industry.
David, I've got one last question for you, and I think everyone will enjoy this because it's the opportunity for you to share some of the lessons that you've learned within this project, because I understand that it was incredibly not just ambitious and delivered, but done in a very, very short space of time as well. I'm sure everyone would love to know any of the key lessons that you learned within this project, which they might be able to benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot, and there are a lot, and the question around how does a small business think about doing some of this? I think that it has been a challenge. I think that a lot of the tools are likely to get easier over time. I think that if you're a small business, I suspect that it'll be much more accessible to get these worlds set up. We've learned a lot around the fundamentals, things like how to pay for things in the metaverse. We actually had to use proprietary currency that was Decentraland's, cryptocurrency, and we had to exchange Bitcoin for their currency. That took a little bit of effort. We had to figure out what would actually make customers want to come to our experience. Thousands of these experiences. We had to talk to customers to understand what would make them want to come. You have to make fundamental decisions, like where do you want to put your experience? You actually have to look at a map in these different platforms. For our case, it was Decentraland. You have to pick a neighborhood. You have to think about who your neighbors are. You have to think about some of the rules of that platform. So the team just did an amazing job of thinking through all those details. It wouldn't be unlike at a small scale, building a conference center. We did an event in January where we rented a space and into a conference center. This is actually like building a conference center. And so all those logistical things around what you want your design to be, how do you want your brand to show up, what decisions you want to make on the flow of your experience, all those micro decisions. We were starting from scratch, had never done it in a virtual world. And I think that right now, it's very unclear which platforms are going to be the big platforms. There were, again, thinking about Web 1 and Web 2, it was unclear which would be the big search engines. There was dozens of search engines competing until there weren't. I suspect that will also play out. So there's lessons here to be learned around what are the dynamics of which platforms in the metaverse lots of people will go to, versus which ones will likely sort of die out over time. But for us, all of them will be rooted in just staying close to our customers. The customers are the ones taking us into this Web3 world, and that's how we'll be figuring out how to stay current.
David, it has been an absolute pleasure spending 16 minutes of you, plus the interruption, exploring the metaverse. And I think just from a personal point of view, I would just like to express huge congratulations to you and the team, because I genuinely think that you've pulled off something which is really immersive, really innovative, and is a really interesting way to engage and make a meaningful relationship with your audience. So congratulations to the team. I think it's very inspiring for all of us. We're now going to hand back to Hilary and to Cathy and David, that you're going to join them as well, I believe, for the Q&A, which
Yeah.
the audience have been sending in. So once again, everyone, thank you for staying with us during the technical hitch, and we'll now go back to the live Q&A.
Thanks, Jez.
Great. Welcome back. And as Jez said, thanks for your patience and sticking with us. The irony is not lost on me that we're having technical difficulties in our Tech Forward program. So thank you for being flexible. So now we're going to use our time to ask Cathy and David questions that have been coming in from attendees throughout the program. As I mentioned earlier, they have been just flooding through, so we will try to get through as many as we can in the time that we have. So Cathy, a question for you first. We just were able to see a bit of what Fidelity is doing really creatively with Metaverse, but I know that you and your organization are in this space too. Could you tell us a little bit more about how the Features Intelligence Group is using this virtual space?
Yeah, so we've become build partners with a lot of the platforms. So we have offices in Roblox, Fortnite Creative, Decentraland, like Fidelity does, the Sandbox, VR Chat, you name it, Rec Room. I mean, you name it, all the platforms, we actually have built our own offices in all of these different worlds. And we use them for several reasons, right? We use them as demo spaces. So when we're building for a client, like a big brand or like a big company or like potentially like, any type of company that needs to build in that space, like Fidelity did. They're not our client, but we use that space as a demo space, right? So just like people would go see a model home, we meet with them in our different offices and all these different platforms and start to talk about what they would like to see here, what they would like to see there, how big they want their land to be. So just like you were mentioning, like you have to make a lot of choices. Like where do you build? What do you build? How high up do you go? So things like that. And then the really interesting thing is we're using them for recruiting as well. So right now I'm building for a lot of different brands in Roblox, for example. And what we're doing is I'm meeting with Roblox developers and I'm trying to recruit. I meet with them in our Roblox offices before I even meet with them on Zoom or in real, in physical life, because that's what they're going to be building, right? I want to make sure that I am talking to them in the right, that I'm interviewing them where they're going to be building. So just a really different way. I haven't really seen that many people use this for recruiting. But yeah, we're really excited to have offices in all these different spaces as well and work with a lot of different brands and companies to help them, enter this new space and become that builder for them.
That's fascinating. A lot of organizations will say they want somebody who can hit the ground running, and you're really challenging them to that right from the get-go. That's great. David, a question for you from a small business owner. They're saying, as many small businesses have very small teams and the folks on those teams play various roles across their organization, what's the best way for small businesses to stay in tune with new tech trends and how they can use them to impact their business?
Tech trends in general. I mean, I'll take it a little bit towards sort of the Web 3.0. I think if you look at where the big numbers are, if you want to stay current on Web 3, and Cathy said this, I mean, you've got to really spend a little bit of time on some of these gaming platforms. There's 70% of young people consider themselves gamers. And I think even a small business can play there. The tools are much more robust for gaming than they are for some of these other more robust metaverse experiences. So you could even experiment with having, creating games just to get a sense of what that community is all about. Just from a commercialization perspective, we've also just partnered with people who are already deep in some of these platforms. So people play games and have followers, and the followers, learn from these leaders in these platforms. We've actually partnered with some of them to talk about some of the products and services that might be relevant to them. Though that can be done at a very modest scale and doesn't require any technical build whatsoever. It's just a matter of finding influencers. And by the way, in Web 2, that's also a really good strategy. No matter what industry you're in, someone is talking about it in social media. And a lot of those folks are open to partnerships. I just saw a stat. We're looking at this, this creator economy. There's 12 million people, according to the numbers we've seen, that are making at least $500 a month somewhere in these digital platforms as a creator. So, you don't need a lot of budget, to find someone who might want to partner with you in the market that you're in, and get that voice out there.
And Hilary, another idea to David's point is, if you're a mom and pop shop or a small business in your you're known in your local community, you could even hold a world building, competition during the summer. The kids are in coding camp, right? You could partner with, a code camp and say, whoever builds our office will have people vote on our favorite, the favorite ice cream shop in Roblox. There's ways to kind of be creative about this, where it doesn't mean that you have to hire a game development team. So yeah, I think that there's fun ways to go about it. And for example, my son, he's 10 years old, mind you, but to me, he's a small business owner because he makes $100 a month off of the world he built in Roblox. Every month he makes $100 because people play his game. So there's a lot of things happening here where, a big influencer like, Kim Kardashian, you might not be able to afford that, but there are going to be different, let's say new creators in this space that you can partner with and grow as they grow as well.
Great. That actually lends to another question that came in from the audience. And it says, what's the best platform for promoting our metaverse experience for new exposure and viewers outside of basic social media? And so maybe, I think we've heard a little bit from the youth of how to engage young people, but from adults and thinking about adult consumers and, consumers as a whole, other ways to engage them and introduce them to companies, how they're working in the metaverse more broadly. Cathy, what do you
want to take that first?
Yeah, I guess I'm missing a little context. I feel like they're saying their metaverse experience. Can you read the question again?
Yeah, so it's sounding like it's coming from a company that's getting into the metaverse and is trying to figure out how to get exposure and to sort of get the message out that they're doing this and to engage people to come and use their experience.
Well, I think it's going to depend on where the experience is built, right? Where there's the most eyeballs. But I think communities, Discord, and obviously I'm not telling people to go to Discord. Please don't click on links or respond to DMs on Discord. That's advice, sound advice for anyone on Discord. But going into Discord, different Discord servers, building community, sharing with folks what you're doing, So yeah, it doesn't only have to be Twitter and Facebook, right? You can be on Discord. Reddit, for example. Reddit could be a kind of a strange place, but it also can be a great place for promoting these sorts of things with your local media, right? Even if you want to kind of get, on TV or the newspaper, if you're doing something really unique, you can go to local media. I think there's going to be different ways, but I think you have to engage community. If anyone here takes anything away from what I said today, is the following: community and authenticity are kings in this future we're going into. And you're not going to be able to kind of build without community and being authentic in the space. So finding ways to promote what you're doing, having people visit your experience, but how can you leverage community, right? How can you drive community there? And how can the people in your community help you get more people there? That would be my advice for anyone that has an experience on whichever platform they're building it.
And I might add, I totally agree. And distinctiveness might be the other factor. Just like any business, the more distinctive you can be, the easier it is to drive word of mouth. So, one way to get people to use your experience is to have something really interesting, and then it's open, right? That's the beauty of these decentralized platforms, that other people can tell people the coordinates to get to your experience or your game and actually find it themselves.
Great. And to follow up on that, we have another question asking if you have seen any great examples of smaller brands or smaller companies in the metaverse and how they're using it. Cathy, do you have anything that you could share there?
In our builds, the builds that we work on are mostly bigger brands, right? So I would have to kind of do a little bit more research on smaller businesses and how they might be building spaces. That being said, you can still participate in different communities. I know, for example, I'm part of the Bored Apes, which is a whole other phenomenon, but I'm part of this community of NFT holders that have these apes. And for example, I know like when I go to Miami, there might be special discounts that I'm given because I have this special NFT, right? So there might be ways to kind of tap into some of those things, especially if there's certain groups that are quite active in your community. But yeah, I would have to kind of like spend a little bit more time thinking about how maybe some of the small mom and pop shops or small businesses are activating in the space in its current form.
Great, thank you. Well, we unfortunately are out of time for Q&A, but invite the audience to continue to send your questions to us, and we're happy to share them with the experts and get back to you with some answers. Cathy, David, also Jez, thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion. I know I've learned a lot. Hopefully our audience has as well. And it's really great to see what both of you are doing in this space, or David for Fidelity in particular. I love to get my children in the Decentraland to start learning about finances and how to be prepared for that in the future. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dragos, co-founder and CEO of Holotech. What you're seeing next to me is my avatar, or better said, one of my avatars that's being brought to life by our software called Animaze. So how does Animaze work? For instance, in the case of a Zoom call, instead of hooking your webcam to the Zoom app, you send your webcam input to the Animaze app. Animaze does its face tracking and emotion tracking and creates the avatar that mimics your expressions and emotions, and then sends that video feed with the avatar to the Zoom app. Ever since we've started working on live avatars, we've had the opportunity to be part of a lot of exciting projects. So I hope I'm not upsetting anyone by restricting this answer to just 4 recent collaborations. On the Avatar Creator Engine side, we loved working with the Ready Player Me team to bring their avatars to life in Animaze. We're also honored to be part of the L'Oreal Beauty Tech Atelier program at Station F for reimagining beauty tech for the metaverse. On the hardware side, we had a blast adding Elgato Stream Deck support to Animaze. On the sports influencer side, we loved bringing to life Marvelo Bolovic, the unofficial owner of the Dallas Mavericks NBA team. But wait, there's more. Now, speaking of sneak peeks of future collaborations, happy to intro MSI's very own Lucky Dragon. Him and his friend the Thunderbird will be making their way to you. More will be revealed soon. But we had a great time working with a great team at MSI, bringing the Lucky Dragon and Thunderbird to life. Until then, happy streaming and see you in the metaverse.
Well, thanks to Dragos for showing us a little bit about how avatars are created to be used in these types of virtual spaces. Thank you all for tuning in today. I hope you've learned a little bit more about the metaverse and how you can potentially use it for the future. The opportunities truly seem endless. Stay tuned for more information on our next episode of Tech Forward, which will be on June 21st, and we will see you in the future. Thank you.